The Damiki Rig is the hottest bait in bass fishing right now, and for good reason. Bass love it. But with everyone throwing this bait now, there are 3 mistakes that you want to avoid with this technique to ensure that you can catch more fish than everybody else. So stay tuned and let's get into it.
We got that one. There we go. That one smoked it. There we go. First one of the day. Absolutely choked that Damiki down in there. And that is going to bring us to mistake number 1 when fishing a Damiki rig. We're going to get him off the line here and throw him back, and we're going to talk about that. So obviously there's no denying that the Damiki rig is an absolutely amazing bass fishing lure with how good it's been, people winning tournaments like crazy, and when paired with live scope, it's obviously absolutely deadly. But mistake number 1 is thinking that this can only be a live scope bait. If you don't have live scope, you can't fish this bait. Completely wrong. If you want to fish a pond, a creek, whatever, you can use this bait and catch a ton of fish with it because it mimics a dying bait fish or a naturally swimming bait fish, and it catches a ton of fish. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to retrieve this bait so that you can catch fish even if you don't have live scope. That fish right there, I didn't even see him on the graph bite it. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm using my graph to find these rock piles. So you can see right there is that rock pile. I can't see any fish in there. There might be one back here, but that thing's underneath the boat. I can't see any fish. I'm using my 360 to find these rock piles. And then what I'm doing is I'm casting my bait to that area. But really, if I wanted to, I could know there's a rock pile over there. I could throw my bait out. And this bait works from the top of the water column all the way to the bottom. So usually what I'd do is I'd start on the bottom and slowly work my way up the water column. So I'd cast it out, I let it sink all the way down to the bottom, and then you just go ahead and shake this thing back, and you don't even have to see if there's anything there. You don't have to be watching your bait the whole time to see if there's a fish chasing it or anything like that. You can go ahead and just work your bait back like you would any other lure. If you were fishing a swim bait, you'd just retrieve your swim bait in without using live scope or anything like that. So you can do the same thing with this lure and still catch just as many fish. And then as I continue to make my casts, I can figure out if these fish are suspended, bottom of the water or whatever. I can start to cast this thing out here, and maybe I let it sink 3 seconds this time, and I'll count 1, 2, 3, and then I'll start shaking it back that time, and I can cover a little bit higher in the water column. And then you can figure out how deep those fish are in the water column by how many seconds you're letting that bait sink, and work your bait back to the boat. And you might not ever have live scope, you might be bank fishing, and you can still use this bait to mimic those little bait fish that these fish are feeding on, because ultimately that is why this bait is so deadly. Live scope helps, but because of this bait rocking side to side and darting through the water, that is what catches the most amount of fish. So presenting it properly is more important than having live scope. Let's move on, see if we can catch a couple more and get to mistake number 2. There we go. Another one. So with fish number 2, that is going to take us to mistake number 2, which is actually going to come down to your gear with a Damiki rig. It seems like a pretty basic bait, just a jig and a minnow, but there's a few different things you can do with your technique here to catch even more bass. So let's break down the gear that you need for fishing this bait right here. Okay, so when it comes to Damiki rig gear, the first thing you need is obviously a spinning rod. This is going to be a spinning rod technique. It excels on that. That's going to be the best way to rig this thing up. What we have is my Cashin Icon Ned rig rod right here. This is super important to have a rod with a very soft tip. The softer the tip on your rod, the better you're going to be able to work that slack in your line and get the bait to perform properly in the water. But you still need a little bit of a backbone to be able to set the hook on these fish when they come up and eat that, because this is a single hook jig head, and a lot of these have some a little bit thicker wire hooks on them. I don't want something too thick because I do want to be able to penetrate it with a spinning rod, so I want a light wire jig head. But the couple that we've been using today, either my hand pour ball heads here that I use, or I use the 6th Sense finesse jig swim bait heads. The biggest thing with your swim bait head that you're going to use for your bait is it has to have a 90-degree line tie. That is going to give the bait the action it needs. If it doesn't have a 90-degree line tie, your bait is not going to roll properly in the water. The second thing that I have here is obviously my spinning reel. I talk about this one all the time. It's the Shimano Sedona. It has a super smooth drag. You can see I'm catching these smallmouth. They can pull drag. I don't have to worry about breaking off a light leader or anything like that. And I can catch some big smallmouth or largemouth if I fish this technique for largemouth as well. So this is a very good budget spinning reel to have. It's an excellent setup right here with this Cashin Icon rod. If you want to check out any of the gear, it will all be linked in the description below, so you can check out any of the products we're going to talk about in today's video. And what I like to do is use 15-pound test straight braid, the lime green, so I can see my bait working properly. I'm using that line to determine if my bait is working properly in the water because I can watch it jump, and that's that lime green braid. I'm being able to see what my bait's doing, where if you just had straight fluorocarbon or something like that, it'd be a little bit harder to tell what your bait's actually doing in the water. And then I have tied to this with an FG knot about 10 foot of 8-pound test fluorocarbon so those fish can't see the last little bit of that braid there. So that's the spinning setup. The last thing I'm going to talk about is your bait selection and your weight selection. Both are more important than your entire spinning rod setup. Probably everybody has a spinning rod you could fish with this, but your bait and your weight selection is going to determine how many fish you catch. Today I'm fishing on a river, and there is not a lot of current out here today, so these fish are willing to chase a little bit for the bait, but you need your bait to flow naturally through the water and look like it's one of those bait fish just drifting down the current. So if you're fishing like a 1/2-ounce jig head on here, it's just gonna get buried into the cover, it's not gonna drift naturally and not get a lot of bites. I started using a 1/4 ounce. I was catching a couple fish, but I would notice they would chase it and turn away. And then what I did is I switched to a 1/8 ounce head and started flowing it a little slower in the water, and all of a sudden I started to catch more fish. So just a small change in weight size can make a huge difference on your bait because you get the natural flow and movement of that bait. So carry a bunch of different weight sizes, change them up as you need to get the right action and depth out of your bait. And then lastly, your actual bait selection. The two that we've been using today, the 6th Sense Juggle Minnow. If you want to support the channel, the best way you can do it is use my code for the 6th Sense website down below. That will get you 10% off any of your orders on 6th Sense website. It really helps me out a ton, and I would appreciate that. The other one we've been mixing in is the Z-Man Scented Jerk Shads. This is a good one too. The difference between these two baits is one is going to sink. This is going to be regular plastisol salt. It's going to get down in the water a little bit better. So that combined with the 1/8 ounce, it might have a different action than if you use the scented jerk shad. It's going to naturally be more buoyant in the water, but both are very great baits. I use them all the time, and we're just using shad patterns. I have like a coral minnow on here right now. We've been using electric shad and a Spanish pearl. Those are the 3 colors that I'm really playing around with here today, but we're going to get back to fishing to see if we can catch us another one, and on to mistake number 3. Everybody's leaving. Got another one. This one feels nice. That's because she is nice. Ooh, we got us a good one. Oh yeah, look at that one. Mistake number 3 is that it is all about the retrieve. Nothing else matters throughout today's video if you do not master the retrieve. And if you do master the retrieve, you catch a bunch of fish just like this. So let's get up on the front deck, show you how to retrieve this bait so that you can catch the most amount of fish possible, just like this guy. See, buddy? Okay, so the biggest mistake that you can make with this retrieve is shaking your line way too much. That's gonna give this bait way too much action, and you'll see it dart up and down on live scope like this if you have it. What you want to do is basically have your bait just kind of flowing through the water column above the cover, but when you're shaking it, it's actually rolling the bait side to side. And that's why we talked about some of those things with your gear to get that bait to roll side to side. That's what you want it to do. You don't want it darting up and down, you just want it rolling side to side. And to get that action, here's how you retrieve the bait. You're gonna throw this thing out there. You're gonna let it sink down like you usually would, however you're doing. Watch it on live scope, cast it out, everything we talked about so far. But the biggest thing is you're gonna wanna retrieve this, and you'll see everybody shaking their line like this. And their rod tips shaking like crazy, and they're reeling and doing all this. That's getting your bait to go like this. What I'm actually doing is just picking up the slack with my reel. You can see as I'm shaking my rod tip, I'm just shaking the slack, and all my reel is doing is picking up the slack. It is not moving the bait forward whatsoever. I'm only moving the bait with the current, letting the current do the work, and the rod tip. And I thought I just had a bite right there. That would have been sick. But that is all I'm doing. You literally just need to shake the rod tip, and that's why you have that lime green braid. I'm watching my line. As soon as it comes tight to the bait, it's almost like jerkbait or topwater fishing when you're walking the dog. As soon as I come tight with the bait, I stop. If you're pulling and pulling the bait, that's getting it to move. But as soon as you touch that tightness, and that's where the braid comes in handy, as soon as you touch that tightness with the bait and stop, that causes the roll. So that's the difference between getting it to roll and dart. And that is also the difference between catching 100 fish or like 3 fish with this bait. So super important. The best in the world, the guys from Japan, everything like that, they are masters of that retrieve. That is the biggest thing with this bait. Your bait selection and your jig head selection, obviously important as well, but the retrieve is more important than anything else when it comes to this technique. So let's see if we can get us one more, putting all these mistakes together. Got us another one. Saw him come up off the bottom and grab that. So next time you're out fishing, make sure you're not making these Damiki Rig mistakes so you can catch more fish just like this one right here. Check out this video right here if you want to see the other bait I pair with that to catch even more bass, and hit the subscribe button down below. And thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.